So now that I'm approaching the outdoor season, I've decided to make some changes to my training after reflecting on how the indoor season went, how I performed, and where the gaps are in my performance where I think I can get better. One big area that I think I can get better in is the first 10 meters. Now, to improve that doesn't mean I'm just going to run a bunch of 10s, because I don't think that that's particularly effective. I don't think the velocities we hit in short acceleration sprints are very potent for causing adaptation. Now, if you're new to training or you are coming off of a training break, then yeah, accelerating to 30 meters, 20 meters without any load or just regular sprints, yeah, that'll help you get better. But after a while, your body gets used to it. The velocities are not very high, and eventually, for me at least, my body stops adapting to the training. So one change that I'm making to really emphasize acceleration, especially early acceleration, is focusing on rate of force development both in the gym and on the track. Now, in the gym, I'm doing that with things like rear leg elevated deadlifts, hex bar deadlifts, concentric jumps like a squat jump, and then, of course, accessories for core, hamstrings, adductors, stuff like that. But to improve rate of force development, we want to do a few things. Either A, lift a heavy load and move it as fast as you can. Even though it's moving slow, you're moving it as fast as you can. You have the intent to move it fast. You can move a lighter load fast, and you can also pick exercises that are somewhat relevant to the thing you're trying to improve your rate of force development in. So that's where the rear leg elevated deadlift idea came in. Get into a position that's somewhat similar to acceleration. Do a concentric movement like a deadlift where you're trying to move the bar as fast as you can off the ground as rapidly as you can. So that's where I came up with that idea. But I did bring in regular hex bar deadlifts because I felt like you can only go so high in load on an exercise that is split leg or rear leg elevated that requires balance and that sort of thing. So I think if you only do movements that are split leg or something like that, you're going to be missing something in the really high end of the force output spectrum. And so that's where doing things like a regular hex bar deadlift is useful, pairing that with a concentric jump, because you can get really high loads, really high force outputs, really high power outputs, depending on the load and the velocity. And by doing that, I think, if you can mix in things that are maybe a little bit more relevant on the technique or movement pattern side, like the rear leg elevated deadlift, that's good for certain things because of the positions and the split leg position, how it's loaded. It has unique aspects to it that I think are beneficial, especially like how it affects the glute, adductors, and kind of how it affects your core because of the split leg position. But I also think we need to do things that are just purely high force outputs, and the best way to do a high force output exercise is a very stable exercise, a bilateral exercise, and so the hex bar deadlift makes sense to me as something that will be useful for improving rate of force development. On the track, I'm doing sled pulls out of blocks using a new sled that I bought. You can check the link down below to Simply Faster to see the sled that I got. It's the Sprint Start sled. It's made by Gill Athletics. But basically, it's an inverted U shape, so you can be in the blocks, sprint, and it'll glide over the blocks without hitting them, and it allows you to do block starts with load. And I think that if we can be in the most specific position possible in the blocks, rather than in a 4-point stance where your feet are on the ground, if we have our feet up on the blocks, we can push horizontally, and we can load that with the Sprint Start sled. That seems to me like something that can be a very potent thing for improving block push-off time, for improving the explosiveness of your block starts, and for improving rate of force development out of the blocks. If you're doing things in the gym that are going to develop rate of force development, like the deadlifts, rear leg elevated deadlifts, the concentric jumps, the movements where your intent is to go from no movement to maximal movement as fast as possible, that's going to develop those general qualities of rate of force development. Then we come onto the track on a different day, and we do block starts with a sled, pushing against the blocks horizontally with load that's loading us horizontally. That's going to help us with rate of force development as long as our intent is to go from no movement to maximal movement as quickly as possible. So between those two, buckets of training in the gym for the general stuff and on the track with the sled, I think that could create a good opportunity to improve rate of force development out of the blocks. So those are two major focuses of my training right now. I think this is really important. I think this is going to be a game changer for me. Maybe it won't improve my block start times, but I think it's going to have a positive effect, because in the one day that I've used it, I noticed a totally different feel when I went from the block start with the sled to block starts without the sled. I noticed that the angles lined up, my rhythm felt good, and I was able to feel explosive without trying to feel explosive. By doing the block starts with the sled and then contrasting that with regular block starts with no load, I find that it sort of tunes your brain into striking in the right direction, applying force properly, building your rhythm from more forceful pushes to quicker strides as you go. And when I'm able to do that in the blocks, there's just something unique about doing it out of the blocks versus doing it out of a 4-point stance. And I think it just goes back to the idea that if we want to improve something, we should make the conditions similar to the condition we're trying to improve, but we might change something like the load. So we're in the blocks, we're in a condition that is relevant to our race, but we change the conditions a little bit by adding load. It's important that as we train and as our body adapts to our training, that we use intelligently programmed variation so that once our body adapts to something, we can give it something new to adapt to and it won't get stale. I've found that if all I do is regular acceleration with no load, that eventually, and it doesn't take very long, my acceleration times stagnate. Why is that? Well, I think for one, if you're doing acceleration work, the velocities are not high enough to cause changes as it relates to like speed of movement. So if you're accelerating to 10, 20, 30 meters, you're not hitting maximal velocity at that point. And so I don't think it's really potent enough to cause you to get faster per se. It's good for working on the rhythm, it's good for working on the technique, it's probably good for general power outputs, and I'm sure, as you do acceleration work, you will improve at it. But eventually, if you keep doing acceleration, you do hundreds and hundreds of acceleration sprints throughout a year, eventually that stimulus is no longer going to be very potent for your body. It's going to adapt to it, and then it's going to say, I don't need to adapt to this anymore. So how do we, cause a change then if our body's adapted to acceleration training? Well, we do something like you add sleds in. I started when I reintroduced sleds, I started the reintroduction process by simply doing sleds with no sprints. Part of that was because after I did my last indoor meet, I felt kind of flat, tired, unmotivated. It was sort of a planned down week to just let my body recuperate from the indoor season. So I wasn't intending on running fast or doing a whole lot of training. But to give my body something completely different than what it had been used to over the past couple months, I started doing sleds only, no sprints without the sled, for a couple sessions. Now I'm back to where I'm doing a contrast between sleds and sprints, and then that can set me up to eventually move back to only doing accelerations without load, maybe when I'm ready to peak or something like that. But for now, I plan on keeping the sleds in my training because that's how I'm giving my body something different to deal with and give it a reason to continue to adapt to training, dedicate resources to getting better. And I think by using the sled paired with the block starts and doing the sled out of the blocks, I think this is a good way to, give my body something slightly different, encourage my body to produce high rates of force development out of the blocks in that very specific position, and we'll see how it goes. I've also started to do wickets at the beginning of my sessions, 3 to 4 runs through the wickets. I find that it really helps me get more opened up in my warm-up. It helps make sure that I'm, getting my posture right, I'm getting frontside mechanics. So I've been doing wickets at the beginning of my sessions, which is something new that I've introduced recently. So that's another change I've made. A couple other minor things, I'm working on making sure that I'm bringing my knees up to the center point of my body rather than letting them come out. I have a tendency to have my knees drive out, and so I've been working adductor strength as well as trying to, control my technique a little bit more so that I'm directing everything forward, down in a more linear or less side-to-side fashion, because I think I'm a powerful athlete. I think I'm pretty fast, but I don't always direct my forces in the exact direction I need to go. So that's another thing I've been working on from a technique standpoint. So I think between those few things, the rate of force development work in the gym, rate of force development work on the track, the wickets to kind of tune my brain so I have a better session, the technique work to make sure I'm running efficiently, and then as I throw in some short speed endurance work like 80s, 90s, stuff like that, I think I'm going to have a pretty good training setup to run well during outdoor. So I'm looking forward to see how things go, but that's where I'm at right now with my training. I think if ultimately I can improve my explosiveness out of the blocks, and I can be at a higher velocity as I exit the blocks. That's going to help improve my acceleration, make it easier to get to top speed fast, or fast top speed. And if all those things come together, I've pretty much no doubt that I'm going to run fairly well, get close to a PR, or set a new PR this season. So that's where my mind is at right now. Get strong, get explosive, improve my rate of force development, improve my technique. If you do that, probably going to run faster, right? As long as you stay healthy. So I think to recap, there's a couple things to take home here. First of all, when you do an indoor season or an outdoor season, don't look at it as, this is it, this is my last chance or whatever. Each season is an opportunity for you to learn about yourself, learn about how different types of training worked for you or didn't work for you, see how you respond in competition versus how you are in practice, because at first you might find that you're a little nervous at your meets and you can't quite perform very well, but then you hone that ability. Maybe you see that certain parts of your race are underdeveloped and you need to focus on developing those. So use your races, use your meets, indoor season, outdoor season, all of it. Use it as an opportunity to learn about yourself and to become a better athlete and a better coach as a result of that, rather than I didn't set a PR, so I'm a failure and I suck and I'm just going to quit. That's a terrible attitude to have. I'm not saying any of you have that attitude, but sometimes people will put way too much weight or gravity on any specific performance or any specific meet or season, and I just don't think it benefits us to weigh ourselves down like that. I think we need to look for opportunities, see every time we race as an experiment to see how our training, is working for us. Did we set ourselves up for success at the meet with how we set up our training leading up to it? Was our preparation on point? Use it as an opportunity to learn. Second takeaway point is that you have to have variation in your training, and once you reach, say, if you set a personal best or you are stagnating, either way might be a situation where you want to vary up your training. Now, if you PR and you continue to PR, well, keep doing what you're doing. But eventually, once you stagnate and you no longer are seeing personal bests, or you no longer see, your lifts improving or your times improving or your jumps improving, that's when you want to switch things up. There's different ways we can do that. We can switch up the exercises we're doing, which is probably the best way to go about it. So going from, say, the back squat to a deadlift, or from the deadlift to the split leg deadlift or the rear leg elevated deadlift. You're keeping the themes the same. You're lifting heavy, you're doing plyometrics, you're sprinting, but you change things up slightly so that way you give your body something different to deal with that's still relevant to what you're trying to improve. Maybe you go from regular accelerations to accelerations with the sled, or if you've been doing sleds, maybe you go from no sleds to longer accelerations without the sled, so then you're hitting higher velocities, and that's how you're changing it up. Maybe you buy or use wearable resistance in some of your sprints as a way to mix things up. But you want to find unique ways to change your training while keeping it relevant to your ultimate goals, but doing something different than what you've been doing. Maybe you've been doing speed endurance work and you've been doing it sprint, float, sprint. Maybe you switch that up to flat out sprints all the way through, or you change up how you're doing the sprint, float, sprint. These are all little ways that we can change our training to keep encouraging the body to change, to accept the training, to adapt to the training, and to get better. If all we ever do is the same thing, we're just going to get the same results. And once you've done a certain type of training for a while, your body's no longer going to respond to that. What worked for you last year, what worked for you last week, what worked for you when you were in college or high school is probably not the exact thing that's going to work for you now. So you can't simply plug and play stuff you've done before into your training now and expect it to work the same. You can do a similar workout. You can even do the same workouts you did before. But you have to find ways to modify your training. Otherwise, your body's just going to stagnate and you're not going to continue to improve. So keep this stuff in mind. Think of ways that you can modify your training. Think of ways that you can keep progressing toward your ultimate goals, and use your competitions, use your seasons as ways to learn more about yourself, learn what worked, learn what maybe should be different going forward. And if you approach things from that perspective of willingness to learn, a positive mindset, a mindset on focuses on improving rather than focuses on failures and things like that, and you keep your mind open to changing your training when it's time to keep the body, adapting, then I think if you have that mindset, you're going to be very successful in whatever you do in life, whether it's training or something else. So keep this stuff in mind. Hopefully it makes sense to you guys. That's all I got for you guys right now. This is Cody Bidlow of SprintingWorkouts.com and AthleteX, signing off.